Have you ever wondered how families survived on just pennies a day during the Great Depression? The answer might surprise you. A 5-pound bag of cornmeal cost just 23 cents in 1933, and from that single bag, a skilled grandmother could feed her entire family for 2 weeks. She transformed that humble cornmeal into golden cornbread for breakfast, creamy puddings for dessert, crispy fritters for dinner, and even sweet jelly made from the leftover cobs that most people threw away. These weren't just recipes. They were survival strategies passed down through generations, and most of them have been completely forgotten by modern families. Today, we're bringing back 25 incredibly cheap corn dishes that kept millions of Americans fed during the toughest years this country has ever seen. Cornmeal mush. Let's start with the most famous one. If cornbread was the workhorse of Depression-era cooking, cornmeal mush was the quiet hero that nobody talked about, but everybody relied on. This dish required nothing more than coarse cornmeal, water, and salt. That's it. 3 ingredients. Grandma would heat water in her cast iron pot until it reached a rolling boil, then slowly sprinkle in the cornmeal while stirring constantly with a wooden spoon. The constant stirring prevented lumps from forming and ensured a smooth, creamy texture. As the mixture thickened, she'd reduce the heat, cover the pot, and let everything simmer gently for another 10 or 15 minutes until the raw corn taste disappeared and a subtle, nutty aroma filled the kitchen. On better days, a pat of butter or a splash of evaporated milk went in at the end to make the mush richer and smoother. But most mornings, it was served plain with just a sprinkle of salt or a drizzle of whatever sweetener the family had on hand. The economics of cornmeal mush are almost hard to believe. That 5-pound bag of cornmeal for 23 cents could stretch into at least 30 servings of mush, meaning each bowl cost less than a penny. Even today, you can make cornmeal mush for about 15 to 20 cents per serving, which is cheaper than instant oatmeal and certainly cheaper than any box cereal on the market. Families who make this dish regularly instead of buying breakfast foods can save $80 to $100 every single month. But the real beauty of cornmeal mush was its versatility. Eat it hot for breakfast with syrup. Let it cool and solidify, then slice it and fry it for dinner. Mix in leftover vegetables or meat scraps to stretch it further. Whatever the situation called for, cornmeal mush adapted. It wasn't fancy, wasn't complicated, but it kept an entire generation of Americans alive during the hardest years. Cornbread. Cornbread wasn't just food in the 1930s. It was currency, comfort, and community all baked into one golden loaf. In rural areas across the South and Appalachia, cornmeal sold for half the price of wheat flour, sometimes even less. That made cornbread the automatic choice for families stretching every nickel. Your grandmother would mix yellow or white cornmeal with whatever leavening agent she had on hand, usually baking powder or baking soda. If she was lucky, there'd be buttermilk in the icebox. If not, plain water worked just fine. 1 egg went into the bowl, followed by a generous spoonful of lard or bacon grease saved from breakfast. Everything got stirred together until just combined, never overmixed. Then the whole thing went into a preheated cast iron skillet and baked until the top turned golden brown and the edges pulled away from the sides. The result was a loaf with a crunchy, almost crispy crust on the outside and a tender, steaming interior that soaked up pot liquor from beans or greens like nothing else could. Back then, the ingredients for 1 skillet of cornbread cost about 5 cents total. In today's money, that's roughly $1.20. Compare that to a $4 loaf of store-bought bread, and you can see why families who master cornbread could save $80 or more each month on their grocery bills. But beyond the savings, cornbread represented something deeper. It was the smell of home, the taste of resilience, and proof that good food didn't require fancy ingredients. Skillet cornbread. Now, you might be thinking skillet cornbread sounds exactly like what I just described, and you'd be mostly right. But there's a crucial difference that every grandmother understood. Regular cornbread might get baked in a pan or a muffin tin, but true skillet cornbread lives and dies by that heavy cast iron skillet that's been in the family for generations. This version was even more stripped down than standard cornbread. No eggs if times were really tight. No milk or buttermilk, just water. No sugar whatsoever. Cornmeal, salt, baking powder, and water. That was it. The magic happened in the preparation of the skillet itself. Grandma would heat that cast iron until it was smoking hot, then coat the bottom and sides with a thin layer of bacon grease or salt pork fat. When the batter hit that hot, greased surface, it would sizzle and immediately start forming that signature crust that made skillet cornbread so special. This was survival food in its purest form. No frills, no compromises, just corn and heat in a well-seasoned pan. In Appalachian communities, families ate this for breakfast with sorghum molasses, for lunch alongside soup beans, and for dinner crumbled into a glass of cold buttermilk. A batch cost 7 cents at most and could feed 6 people. Some families considered it more important than meat because it appeared at every single meal. Today, most people use modern pans and fancy recipes, but the older generation will tell you that skillet cornbread, made any other way, just isn't the same. Every scratch in that old iron, every layer of seasoning built up over decades, every slight variation in heat distribution contributed to the final product. That skillet held memories of every meal, every gathering, every hard winter survived. Indian pudding. Now we move from everyday survival food to something that felt almost like a luxury, even though it cost nearly nothing to make. Indian pudding is a traditional New England dessert that's been around since colonial times, and it experienced a major revival during the Great Depression when sugar and eggs were too precious to waste on fancy cakes. The dish starts with milk, heated gently on the stove with a spoonful of butter and several tablespoons of molasses. As the milk warms, cornmeal gets sprinkled in slowly, stirred constantly until the mixture thickens into something resembling mush. Then comes the spice blend that defines Indian pudding. Cinnamon, ginger, and nutmeg, cheap spices that nearly every household kept in the cupboard since the 1800s. Some grandmothers added a pinch of salt to balance the sweetness. Others included a beaten egg if they had one to spare, which made the pudding richer and more custard-like. Everything got poured into an earthenware crock or a buttered baking dish, then went into a slow oven for hours. The long, slow baking process allowed the flavors to deepen and concentrate, the surface to develop a darker, caramelized layer, and the interior to become smooth and silky. When it finally came out of the oven, Indian pudding was warm, fragrant with spices, subtly sweet from the molasses, and comforting in a way that's hard to describe. The cost in 1930s was roughly 8 to 12 cents for a pudding large enough to serve 6 to 8 people. Molasses was cheap because it was a byproduct of sugar refining, and cornmeal was always affordable. Even milk, which was expensive by Depression standards, didn't break the budget when used in a dessert that fed so many. Today, you can recreate this dish for $2 to $3 total, and the flavor is exactly the same as what your great-grandmother made on winter evenings in her New England kitchen. It's not aggressively sweet like modern desserts. Instead, it has a gentle warmth, a spicy undertone, and a texture that's halfway between pudding and custard. One spoonful, and you're transported back to a time when dessert meant something different than it does now. Corn chowder. When you combine cheap corn with potatoes and onions, you get corn chowder, one of the most famous poor man's dishes in New England and across the northern Farm Belt. This wasn't the cream-heavy, bacon-loaded version you might find in restaurants today. Depression-era corn chowder was much simpler and relied on the natural starch from potatoes to create a thick, satisfying soup. Grandma would start by dicing potatoes into small cubes, about half an inch on each side. An onion or two got chopped up as well. If there was a little bacon or salt pork in the house, she'd fry that first to render out the fat, then use that fat to saute the onions until they turned soft and translucent. Otherwise, she'd just boil everything together in water. The potatoes went into the pot with the onions, covered with enough water to make soup. Corn kernels, either cut fresh from the cob or from a cheap can, got added next. Everything simmered together for 20 to 30 minutes until the potatoes were soft enough to start breaking down and releasing their starch into the liquid, thickening it naturally without any flour or cream. Near the end of cooking, she'd add salt, pepper, and maybe a splash of evaporated milk if the budget allowed. The result was a hearty, filling soup that tasted rich despite containing almost no expensive ingredients. During the Depression, potatoes cost about 2 cents per pound, and corn was similarly cheap. A pot of chowder large enough to feed 6 people cost maybe 15 cents total. Today, homemade corn chowder costs around 40 to 50 cents per bowl, which is dramatically cheaper than canned soup and infinitely better than restaurant versions that charge $6 or $7 for a cup. This dish appeared on tables throughout the winter months when fresh vegetables were scarce and families needed hot, filling food to get through cold evenings. The leftovers reheated beautifully, often tasting even better the next day after all the flavors had time to blend together. Johnny cakes. Corn found its way into breakfast in many forms, but few were as simple or as satisfying as Johnny cakes. These flatbreads, also called hoe cakes in some parts of the South, trace their origins all the way back to Native American cooking traditions. The recipe couldn't be simpler. Cornmeal mixed with hot water or buttermilk, if you had it, until you got a thick batter that could be shaped into patties. Some families added a pinch of salt for flavor and maybe a tiny bit of sugar, but those additions were optional. The key was getting the consistency right, thick enough to hold together, but loose enough to spread slightly when it hit the hot griddle. Grandma would heat her cast iron skillet or griddle until a drop of water danced across the surface, then grease it lightly with bacon fat or lard. She'd scoop the batter by spoonfuls and flatten each one slightly with the back of the spoon. The cakes would cook for 3 to 4 minutes on each side, developing a golden brown crust with crispy edges while staying soft and tender inside. Johnny cakes worked for any meal. In the morning, you'd eat them with molasses or sorghum syrup, maybe alongside a glass of milk. For dinner, they accompanied beans, greens, or stew, serving the same purpose as bread but costing considerably less. During the Depression, a batch of Johnny cakes that fed 8 people cost about 6 cents total. Today, you can make 15 to 20 cakes for around $1.50, which works out to less than 10 cents each. Families who regularly make Johnny cakes instead of buying pancake mix or frozen waffles save roughly $65 per month on breakfast costs alone. The name Johnny Cake has multiple origin stories. Some say it comes from journey cake because travelers could carry them easily. Others claim it's a corruption of Shawnee cake. Whatever the true etymology, Johnny cakes represent one of the most enduring corn recipes in American history, stretching from pre-colonial times right through the Depression and beyond. Hot water cornbread. Here's a recipe most people have never heard of, even though it saved countless families during the Depression. Hot water cornbread, sometimes called scalded cornbread, uses boiling water to transform cornmeal into something almost magical. The process starts with cornmeal in a bowl. Grandma would pour boiling water directly over it, stirring quickly as the hot water cooked the cornmeal slightly and created a thick, sticky dough. A pinch of salt went in for flavor, and that was the entire recipe. No eggs, no milk, no flour, no leavening. Just cornmeal, boiling water, and salt. Once the dough cooled enough to handle, she'd shape it into small, flat patties using her hands or a spoon, then drop them directly into a hot, greased cast iron skillet. They'd fry for just a few minutes on each side until they developed a beautiful golden brown crust that was crispy and almost lacy around the edges. The inside stayed soft and tender, with a texture somewhere between a pancake and a hush puppy. This dish was particularly popular in the Deep South, where families called it by different names depending on which county you were in. Some folks knew it as corn pone, others called it corn cakes, but the recipe stayed essentially the same. The cost was almost non-existent. 2 cents could make enough hot water cornbread to feed an entire family, and the preparation time was under 10 minutes from start to finish. Compare that to driving to the store, buying bread, and driving back home, and you'll understand why this became a staple. In modern terms, you can make 20 pieces of hot water cornbread for less than $3, which works out to about 15 cents each. It's faster than going to a drive-thru and costs a fraction of the price. During the absolute worst years of the Depression, when even eggs became too expensive for some families, hot water cornbread kept appearing on tables because it asked for almost nothing and delivered a filling, satisfying meal. Succotash. Let's talk about one of the oldest dishes in American history. Succotash predates the United States itself, going all the way back to the Wampanoag people who taught European settlers how to grow and combine corn and beans. The word comes from an Narragansett word, Succotash, which means boiled corn kernels. By the time the Great Depression hit, Succotash had evolved into dozens of regional variations, but the core concept remained the same. Corn and lima beans cooked together until tender. In your grandmother's kitchen, Succotash always started with dried lima beans soaked overnight to rehydrate them. The next morning, those beans went into a pot with fresh water and a good pinch of salt. When the beans had cooked long enough to start getting tender, she'd add corn kernels, either fresh off the cob in summer or from a can during winter. A small piece of butter or some bacon fat would go in for richness and flavor. Many families enhanced their succotash with onions, bell peppers, or a splash of milk to make it creamier. Southern versions might include okra, tomatoes, or crumbled bacon. Appalachian families sometimes added a bit of sugar to balance the flavors. The beauty of succotash was its flexibility. You could adjust it based on what was available, what the garden was producing, or what the family could afford that particular week. More importantly, the combination of corn and beans created a complete protein, meaning families could skip meat entirely and still get the nutrients they needed to stay healthy. During the 1930s, a pot of succotash cost maybe 10 to 15 cents and easily fed 6 people. The dish experienced a revival in the 1970s when food prices spiked and people started rediscovering Depression-era recipes. Even today, succotash costs very little to make, maybe $5 for a large pot, and it remains one of the most nutritionally complete vegetarian dishes in American cooking. Corn oysters. Don't let the name fool you. There are no oysters in corn oysters, no seafood at all. This was a clever Depression-era recipe that used cornmeal and fresh corn to create something that looked and felt special, even when the family couldn't afford anything close to real oysters. Grandma would start by mixing cornmeal with eggs and milk, along with salt and pepper for seasoning. If fresh corn was in season, she'd slice the kernels off a few cobs and fold them into the batter. If not, the recipe worked fine with just cornmeal. The mixture had to be thick enough to hold its shape, but loose enough to drop from a spoon. Using a wooden spoon or a ladle, she'd scoop portions of the batter and drop them carefully into hot fat or oil in the cast iron skillet. The fritters would sizzle and puff up slightly, frying quickly until they turned golden brown and developed a crispy exterior. Flipped once, fried for another minute or two on the other side, and then drained on whatever clean cloth or paper was available. The finished corn oysters were roughly the size and shape of fried oysters, which is exactly where the name came from. During an era when seafood was a luxury reserved for people who lived near the coast or had money to spare, these little cornmeal fritters gave families a taste of something that felt fancy. Kids especially loved them because they were crispy, slightly sweet from the corn, and could be eaten with their hands. Served with molasses or sorghum syrup, they made a filling breakfast. Serve alongside beans or greens. They rounded out a dinner. The cost was minimal, maybe 5 to 8 cents for a batch large enough to feed the whole family. Today, you can make the same recipe for a few dollars, and they taste remarkably similar to modern corn fritters sold at restaurants for $8 or $9. For families living through the Depression, corn oysters represented something important. They proved that you could take the cheapest ingredients available and transform them into something that brought a little joy to the table. If these stories are bringing back memories of your own grandmother's kitchen, go ahead and hit the like button below. It lets us know you're enjoying this journey back in time, and it helps more people discover these forgotten recipes. Hush puppies. These golden, crispy balls of fried cornmeal are so associated with Southern cooking that most people don't realize they were born out of pure economic necessity. Hush puppies emerged as a way to use leftover hot oil or lard after frying fish or pork, meaning they cost virtually nothing to make. The batter combines cornmeal with a small amount of flour, some water or milk, chopped onion for flavor, and a bit of baking powder to help them puff up while frying. Some cooks added buttermilk for tanginess. Others used regular milk, or even just water. A little salt and pepper for seasoning, and that was it. Grandma would heat up lard or oil in her cast iron skillet, usually while she was frying fish or chicken. Once the main dish was done, instead of throwing away that expensive fat, she'd use it one more time for hush puppies. She'd scoop portions of the cornmeal batter with a spoon and carefully drop them into the hot oil. They'd bubble and sizzle, slowly turning golden brown and developing a crispy exterior while staying fluffy and tender inside. After 3 or 4 minutes, they'd be done, drained on whatever clean cloth was handy, and serve alongside the main dish. The name hush puppies has a folklore origin that may or may not be true, but it's repeated so often it might as well be fact. The story goes that cooks would make these cornmeal balls and toss them to dogs hanging around the kitchen, saying hush puppies to quiet them down while the family ate. Whether that's historically accurate doesn't really matter. What matters is that hush puppies represented the ultimate in Depression-era efficiency. They used ingredients that cost almost nothing: cornmeal and onions. They utilized already heated fat that would have been wasted otherwise. And they turn out a side dish that people genuinely enjoyed eating. The actual cost per batch was maybe 2 or 3 cents because you were essentially getting free use of the oil. Today, hush puppies at a restaurant might cost $4 or $5 for a small basket. At home, you can make 2 dozen for less than $2. Corn pudding. Corn pudding occupies an interesting space in Depression-era cooking because it managed to feel luxurious despite being made from incredibly affordable ingredients. This is a side dish that showed up at church suppers, family gatherings, and holiday meals throughout the 1930s and 1940s, proving that you didn't need money to bring something special to the table. The base recipe calls for sweet corn, eggs, milk, a small amount of sugar, and butter. Some versions include a bit of flour or cornmeal to help the pudding set properly and give it a texture somewhere between a souffle and a custard. Grandma would mix everything together in a bowl, making sure the eggs were well beaten so they'd help the pudding rise slightly during baking. The mixture got poured into a buttered baking dish, then baked slowly, often in a water bath to ensure even, gentle cooking. This technique, called a bain-marie, prevents the edges from overcooking while the center stays raw. The pudding needed to bake until the top turned golden brown and slightly puffed, while a knife inserted in the center came out clean. The finished dish had a creamy, soft interior with a slightly firmer, golden crust on top. It was subtly sweet, rich with the natural flavor of corn, and satisfying in a way that made it perfect alongside simple main dishes like beans or fried chicken. In 1935, the ingredients for a pan of corn pudding serving 8 to 10 people cost about 20 cents. By the 1970s, that had risen to maybe $2. Today, you can make the same dish for around $7 to $10, depending on whether you use fresh or frozen corn, which is still remarkably affordable for a side dish that serves a crowd. Corn pudding became a staple at potlucks and church dinners specifically because it was cheap enough that anyone could make it, but impressive enough that it looked like you'd put in real effort. It represented the best of Depression-era cooking, taking humble ingredients and transforming them into something that brought people together. Corn pudding casserole. Corn pudding casserole is essentially corn pudding prepared in a way that makes it easier to transport and serve at large gatherings. During the Depression and the decades that followed, potlucks, church suppers, and family reunions were major social events, and everyone was expected to contribute a dish. Corn pudding casserole fit perfectly into this tradition because it was cheap to make, fed a crowd, and traveled well. The recipe is similar to regular corn pudding, but often a bit simpler. Sweet corn, eggs, milk, butter, and a small amount of flour or cornmeal for structure. Everything gets mixed together and poured into a large baking dish, usually something that could go straight from the oven to the table. The casserole bakes until the top turns golden brown and the center sets up firm enough to scoop with a spoon. Some versions include a breadcrumb topping for extra texture, while others stay plain and simple. The key is baking it long enough that it holds together when served, but not so long that it dries out. In Midwestern and Southern communities, corn pudding casserole became one of those dishes that everyone's grandmother made, each with her own slight variations. Some added a pinch of nutmeg or cayenne pepper. Others mixed in chopped peppers or onions. A few made it sweeter with extra sugar, turning it into something closer to a dessert. During the 1950s and 1960s, when canned corn was widely available and cheap, corn pudding casserole appeared at nearly every church supper and family gathering. A pan serving 10 people cost maybe $2 in 1965. Today, you can make the same dish for $7 to $10, which is still remarkably affordable compared to most modern casseroles that require expensive cheese, meat, or specialty ingredients. The enduring popularity of corn pudding casserole shows how Depression-era recipes evolved beyond pure survival food and is something people genuinely wanted to make and eat, even after they could afford fancier options. Corn fritters. Corn fritters take the basic idea of corn oysters and expand it into something more versatile and substantial. This dish became popular during the Depression because it could absorb whatever extra ingredients a family had lying around, stretching a little bit of everything into a complete meal. The foundation is simple enough. Cornmeal, a small amount of flour, corn kernels from a can or fresh off the cob, eggs and milk, salt and sugar for seasoning, and maybe a bit of baking powder to make them lighter. But the genius of corn fritters was that they could accommodate additions. Leftover vegetables from last night's dinner could get chopped up and mixed in. Bits of cheese could be stirred into the batter. Even small amounts of leftover meat could find their way into fritters, stretching expensive protein further than it would normally go. Grandma would mix everything into a thick batter, then use a spoon to drop portions into hot fat in the cast iron skillet. The fritters would fry until golden and crispy on both sides, then get drained and served hot. They could be a side dish, a main course, or even breakfast if served with syrup. During the 1930s through the 1950s, corn fritters cost about 5 to 10 cents per batch, depending on what extras got added. Today, making them yourself costs maybe $1 to $2, while buying something similar at a restaurant would run $8 to $10. The flexibility of corn fritters made them a favorite among housewives who had to figure out how to use every scrap of food before it went bad. Nothing got wasted. Half an onion, a few spoonfuls of canned corn, a tiny piece of cheese, all of it could go into fritters. This approach to cooking, where nothing ever got thrown away and every ingredient served a purpose, defined an entire generation's relationship with food. Cornmeal pancakes. When wheat flour became too expensive or simply unavailable, grandmothers turned to cornmeal pancakes as a way to keep breakfast on the table. These pancakes were different from modern versions in almost every way. They were thinner, denser, and had a more pronounced corn flavor that some people loved and others had to learn to appreciate. The basic recipe called for cornmeal mixed with salt, baking powder, and water or buttermilk. If eggs were available and affordable, 1 or 2 would go into the batter to help bind everything together. But during the worst times, eggs got left out entirely and the pancakes still worked, just with a slightly different texture. Grandma would mix everything just until combined, never overworking the batter, then let it rest for a few minutes while the skillet heated up. She'd grease the skillet lightly with bacon fat or lard, then pour the batter to form thin pancakes about 4 or 5 inches across. These weren't the thick, fluffy pancakes we're used to today. They were closer to crepes, thin and firm with crispy edges. They cooked quickly, maybe a minute per side, and came off the griddle ready to eat. Toppings were simple. Molasses was common because it was cheap and widely available. Sorghum syrup worked just as well. Some families used diluted honey or even just a sprinkle of sugar. Butter was a luxury, used sparingly if at all. The cost savings were substantial. When eggs hit 45 cents per dozen during the Depression, a price that put them out of reach for many families, egg-free cornmeal pancakes cost just a few cents for the whole batch. A family making these for breakfast instead of buying packaged goods or eating out could save $70 or more each month. Today, corn pancakes are experiencing a revival among people interested in traditional cooking and gluten-free diets. But for the Depression generation, they weren't trendy or interesting. They were simply what you ate when wheat flour was too expensive and eggs were a luxury you couldn't justify. Corn cob broth. While we're talking about using corn cobs, let's discuss another secret that modern cooks are only now rediscovering. Corn cob broth adds depth and subtle sweetness to soups and stews without requiring expensive meat bones or store-bought stock. The process is almost identical to making corn cob jelly, at least in the beginning. After cutting kernels off fresh corn, Grandma would save those cobs, rinse them well, and simmer them in water along with vegetable scraps like onion skins, celery leaves, or carrot peelings. The cobs would simmer for at least an hour, sometimes 2 or 3 if she had time, releasing their natural sugars and starches into the water. The resulting broth had a light golden color, a delicate corn flavor, and a slight thickness from the starch. This broth became the foundation for countless soups, including corn chowder, vegetable soup, and even chicken soup when a chicken was available. Using corn cob broth instead of water added flavor without adding cost, which made it invaluable during the Depression. The practice of making broth from vegetable scraps isn't unique to corn cobs. Housewives saved everything: onion skins, potato peels, carrot ends, celery leaves, and used them all to create flavorful bases for cooking. But corn cobs were particularly valuable because they contributed sweetness and body to the broth, not just flavor. Today, this technique is showing up in high-end restaurants where chefs talk about zero-waste cooking and sustainability. They're learning what Depression-era grandmothers knew all along. Every part of the corn has value if you know how to use it. Corn cob jelly. Now we get to one of the most surprising Depression-era recipes, something that sounds almost impossible until you try it. Corn cob jelly transforms the part of the corn that most people throw away into a delicate, honey-flavored spread that tastes nothing like corn. After shelling corn for another dish, Grandma would save every single cob. She'd rinse them thoroughly, break them in half if necessary to fit the pot, then cover them with water and boil them for an hour or more. The long boiling process extracted sugars, flavor compounds, and a faint pink color from the cobs, creating a liquid that tasted mildly sweet and slightly floral. Once the corn cobs had given up everything they had to offer, she'd strain out the liquid, measure it carefully, and add sugar, lemon juice, and pectin according to standard jelly-making ratios. The mixture would get boiled again, this time until it reached the proper temperature for jelly to set. Then she'd pour it into clean glass jars, usually ones she'd saved and reused from previous years, and let cool completely. The finished jelly was pale gold or slightly pink, translucent like honey, and had a surprisingly delicate flavor that worked beautifully on cornbread, biscuits, or toast. The cost was almost zero because corn cobs were free, waste material that would have otherwise been thrown away or fed to animals. Sugar was the only real expense, and even that was minimal. A batch of corn cob jelly might cost 15 cents in the 1930s, and it would fill 4 or 5 jars that lasted for months. Today, you can make this exact recipe for just a few dollars, and it produces something unique that you literally cannot buy in stores. More importantly, corn cob jelly represents the Depression mindset at its finest. Nothing wasted, everything used, and creativity applied to the problem of making food stretch as far as possible. This wasn't just about saving money. It was about respecting food and understanding that even the parts that seem worthless might have value if you're willing to look for it. Cornbread stuffing. Here's where Depression-era frugality really shines through. Instead of throwing away stale cornbread or letting it go to waste, your grandmother turned it into stuffing that was actually better than the version made from expensive wheat bread. The process starts with leftover cornbread, ideally at least a day or 2 old, so it's dry and crumbly. Grandma would break it into rough pieces, somewhere between crumbs and cubes, and put it in a large mixing bowl. Next, she'd saute onions and celery in bacon grease or butter, cooking them until soft and fragrant. Those vegetables got mixed into the crumbled cornbread along with enough broth to moisten everything without making it soggy. The broth was usually corn cob broth or chicken broth if a chicken had been cooked recently. Salt, pepper, and dried sage for seasoning, and that was the entire recipe. Some families added beaten eggs to help bind everything together. Others included bits of sausage or giblets if they were making this for Thanksgiving or Christmas. But the basic version remained simple: cornbread, vegetables, broth, and seasoning. The mixture could be baked separately as a side dish or used to stuff a chicken or turkey. Either way, the cornbread provided a unique texture and flavor that wheat bread couldn't match. It was slightly coarser, a bit sweeter, and held up better to moisture without turning into mush. During the Depression, When wheat flour was expensive and cornmeal was cheap, cornbread stuffing wasn't just a clever way to use leftovers. It was often the only stuffing families could afford to make. The cost was minimal, maybe 5 to 10 cents for enough stuffing to feed 4 to 6 people. Today, you can make this dish for $3 to $4, and it's actually superior to the box stuffing mixes that cost nearly as much and contain nothing but preservatives and salt. Cornbread stuffing appeared on tables throughout the year, not just at holidays. It was a regular weeknight side dish that helped stretch a small amount of meat or made a meatless meal feel more substantial. The fact that it started as a way to avoid waste made it even more valuable in the Depression-era kitchen where nothing, absolutely nothing, ever got thrown away if it could be used for food. Cornbread and pinto beans. Before fast food, before convenience meals, before most of what we consider normal modern eating, there was cornbread and pinto beans. In Appalachian communities and throughout the rural South, this combination appeared on tables every single day, sometimes for all 3 meals. It wasn't a side dish or an occasional meal. It was the foundation of existence. Pinto beans started their life dry and rock hard. Grandma would sort through them carefully, removing any small stones or debris, then soak them overnight in cold water. The next morning, those softened beans went into a cast iron pot with fresh water, salt, a chopped onion, and if the family was lucky, a small piece of salt pork or a ham hock for flavoring. The beans would simmer for hours on the wood stove, filling the house with a gentle, earthy aroma. As they cooked, they'd break down slightly, releasing starch that thickened the cooking liquid into something called pot liquor, a flavorful broth that was almost as important as the beans themselves. While the beans cooked, Grandma would make cornbread using the simplest possible recipe. Cornmeal, water, salt, and baking powder mixed together and poured into a hot, greased cast iron skillet. The skillet went into the oven, and 20 minutes later, cornbread came out with a golden crust and a soft interior. The meal was served in bowls, beans with plenty of pot liquor and cornbread on the side for soaking up that liquid. No meat besides whatever tiny piece had been used to flavor beans. No vegetables unless the garden was producing. Just beans, bread, and the simple satisfaction of a meal that had sustained families for generations. A pot of beans and a loaf of cornbread cost maybe 10 to 15 cents total and fed 5 or 6 people for an entire day. Families would eat this for breakfast before going to the fields, pack it for lunch, and eat it again for dinner. Day after day, week after week, year after year. Today, the same meal costs about $5 to $7, making it one of the most affordable complete meals you can prepare. The combination of beans and corn creates a complete protein, meaning you get all the essential amino acids your body needs without any meat at all. This was survival food in its purest form, cheap, filling, nutritious, and available even when everything else ran out. Hoover stew. Let's talk about one of the most famous Depression-era dishes, named after President Herbert Hoover, who is widely blamed for the economic collapse. Hoover stew wasn't elegant or fancy. It was what you made when the cupboard was nearly bare and you had to feed people with whatever odds and ends remained. The base of the stew was pasta, usually elbow macaroni or whatever shape was cheapest. Grandma would boil a large pot of water and cook the pasta until just tender. While that was happening, she'd prepare the rest of the stew. Canned tomatoes went into the pot, along with canned beans and canned corn. If there was a hot dog or two in the icebox, she'd slice it thin to make it stretch as far as possible, adding little bits of meat flavor throughout the stew without requiring a full pound of expensive protein. Everything simmered together until heated through and the flavors combined. Salt and pepper for seasoning, maybe a pinch of sugar to balance the acidity of the tomatoes, and that was it. The result was a thin, tomato-based stew that filled you up without costing much at all. In the 1930s, a pot of Hoover stew large enough to feed 12 people cost about 20 cents total. Pasta was cheap, canned goods were cheap, and hot dogs were the most affordable meat available. This stew represented the absolute bottom of Depression-era cooking, the meal you made when there was almost nothing left. But here's the interesting part. Despite being created out of desperation, Hoover stew actually tasted decent. The combination of tomatoes, beans, and pasta worked together reasonably well. The bits of hot dog added enough flavor to make it interesting. And most importantly, it was hot, filling, and substantial enough to give people energy for another day. Today, Hoover stew has become a symbol of that era, representing both the hardship people endured and the creativity they applied to survival. You can still make it for just a few dollars, and while it won't win any culinary awards, it'll definitely fill you up. If you've been watching videos on this channel for a while, drop an "I'm back" comment below. It means a lot to know you're here with us, exploring these old recipes and keeping these memories alive. Corn grits. In the South, corn grits are so fundamental to the food culture that some people eat them every single day of their lives. During the Depression, grits were even more important because they were dirt cheap, filling, and versatile enough to work for any meal. Grits are made from coarsely ground corn, processed differently than cornmeal, but similar in concept. A family could buy a large bag of grits for almost nothing, and that bag would last for weeks. Making grits is simple enough that even children could do it. Water or milk goes into a pot and gets brought to a boil. Grits get stirred in slowly, and then the heat gets reduced to a simmer. From there, it's just a matter of stirring frequently and waiting for the grits to absorb the liquid and soften into a thick, creamy porridge. The whole process takes maybe 20 to 30 minutes. Seasoning for grits varied wildly depending on the meal and what the family could afford. For breakfast, they might be served with just salt and butter, or with sugar or molasses for sweetness. If there was bacon, the bacon grease would go into the grits for richness and flavor. For dinner, grits could be savory, mixed with cheese, if available, or served plain alongside beans or vegetables. Some families poured grits into a pan to cool and solidify, then sliced and fried them the next day, similar to fried cornmeal mush. The cost of grits during the Depression was almost negligible. A large pot that fed 6 people cost maybe 2 to 4 cents total. Today, you can make the same pot for $1 to $1.50, which is cheaper than nearly any other breakfast option. Grits represent Southern cooking at its most essential. No frills, no fancy techniques, just corn, water, and heat transformed into something that sustained millions of people through the hardest times. Hamburger spoon bread. During the Depression, ground beef was expensive enough that families had to make it stretch as far as humanly possible. Hamburger spoon bread was one solution, a casserole that combined a small amount of meat with cornmeal-based spoon bread to create something that fed many more people than the meat alone could have fed. Spoon bread itself is a Southern specialty, a soft, pudding-like cornmeal dish that's somewhere between cornbread and a soufflé. It gets its name because it's soft enough to eat with a spoon rather than breaking apart like regular cornbread. To make hamburger spoon bread, Grandma would brown a small amount of ground beef, maybe half a pound, with chopped onions and basic seasonings. Meanwhile, she'd prepare the spoon bread mixture, cornmeal cooked with milk and eggs until it became thick and creamy. The brown meat got mixed into the spoon bread batter. Then everything went into a buttered baking dish and baked until set. The result was a filling, protein-rich casserole that could feed 8 people instead of the 4 that half a pound of ground beef would normally serve. The cornmeal and eggs acted as fillers, but they also contributed their own nutrition and created a texture that made the dish satisfying rather than feeling like stretched leftovers. In the 1930s, ground beef cost about 25 cents per pound, an amount that many families struggled to afford. By mixing it with cornmeal and eggs, both of which were much cheaper, the cost per serving dropped dramatically. Instead of $1.50 per serving of straight beef, hamburger spoon bread came out to maybe 75 cents per serving, cutting the meal cost in half. Modern families still use this exact trick, not just for ground beef, but for all kinds of meat. By extending protein with grains, vegetables, or in this case cornmeal, you can reduce your grocery bill by $100 or more each month while still getting the nutrients your family needs. Hamburger spoon bread proves that Depression-era cooks understood nutrition and economics in ways that many modern cooks have forgotten. Coffee can brown bread. New England has a long tradition of steamed breads, and brown bread is one of the most famous examples. During the Depression, this bread became even more popular because it used cornmeal, rye flour, and molasses, all of which were cheaper than wheat flour and refined sugar. The recipe combines cornmeal with rye flour, adds molasses for sweetness and moisture, includes baking soda for leavening, and mixes in enough buttermilk to create a thick batter. Grandma would pour this batter into empty coffee cans, filling them about 2/3 full to allow room for the bread to rise. The cans got covered with foil or cloth, then placed in a large pot with simmering water that came about halfway up the sides of the cans. The bread would steam for several hours, slowly cooking through without ever drying out or forming a crust. The result was a dense, moist, slightly sweet bread with a unique texture that came from the steaming process. It sliced beautifully and had a deep brown color from the molasses. Families would eat it for breakfast with butter, or alongside beans for dinner, or even as a dessert with a little extra molasses drizzled on top. Molasses was crucial to this recipe and to Depression-era cooking in general. It was significantly cheaper than refined sugar and provided iron, calcium, and other minerals that people desperately needed during times when diets were limited. A loaf of brown bread cost maybe 15 cents to make and provided several days' worth of breakfast for a family. Today, you can buy expensive specialty mold for steaming brown bread, but the original method using empty coffee cans works just as well and honors the Depression-era spirit of reusing everything rather than buying new equipment. Coffee can brown bread represents New England frugality at its finest, taking cheap ingredients, using free leftover containers, and creating something that was genuinely delicious rather than just survivable. Egg drop creamed corn skillet. When the pantry was nearly empty and breakfast needed to happen quickly, this dish saved the day. With just a can of creamed corn and a few eggs, Grandma could create a hot, filling meal in under 15 minutes. The process was straightforward. Creamed corn got poured directly into a heated cast iron skillet. A splash of broth, or even just water, got added to thin it out slightly. As the corn heated and began to simmer, she'd season it with salt, pepper, and a small pinch of brown sugar to balance the flavors. Meanwhile, eggs got beaten lightly in a bowl, just enough to break up the yolks and whites. When the corn was bubbling hot, the eggs got poured in slowly while stirring constantly, creating thin ribbons and curds of cooked egg throughout the corn. The whole dish came together in just a few minutes. No milk required, no butter needed, no complicated technique. Just corn, eggs, and basic seasonings combined in a way that created something much greater than the sum of its parts. During the Depression, this meal cost about 7 to 10 cents and fed 3 or 4 people. The canned corn was cheap, eggs were relatively affordable when bought by the dozen, and everything else was just seasoning. Today, you can make this exact dish for $2 to $3, and it still provides a protein-rich, filling breakfast that costs a fraction of what eating out or buying convenience food would cost. The egg drop creamed corn skillet represents Depression-era cooking at its most practical. No waste, no unnecessary steps, no expensive ingredients, just simple food made quickly with whatever was on hand. For families living paycheck to paycheck, or even less securely than that, meals like this meant the difference between going hungry and having something warm in your stomach. Fried cornmeal mush. We end where we began, with cornmeal mush, but transformed through the simple act of frying. When cornmeal mush was made for breakfast or dinner, there were almost always leftovers. Rather than letting them go to waste, Grandma would pour the leftover mush into a pan or loaf pan and let it cool completely. As it cooled, the mush would solidify into something firm enough to slice. The next morning, she'd cut that solidified mush into slices about ½ inch thick and fry them in hot bacon grease or lard in the cast iron skillet. The slices would hit that hot fat with a sizzle, the exterior quickly turning golden brown and crispy while the interior stayed soft and warm. After a few minutes, she'd flip them carefully and fry the other side until it was equally golden. The finished slices of fried mush had a wonderful textural contrast, crunchy and almost crispy on the outside, soft and creamy on the inside. They could be served sweet with syrup or molasses, or savory with just salt. Some families ate them alongside eggs when eggs were available. Others made a meal of just the fried mush and a glass of milk. The economics of fried cornmeal mush are almost hard to comprehend from a modern perspective. The original cornmeal mush had already been made and eaten. The leftovers were being repurposed rather than thrown away. The bacon grease was saved from breakfast and reused. The only real cost was the fuel needed to heat the skillet. Essentially, this was a free meal created from what would have otherwise been waste. During the Depression, fried cornmeal mush appeared on breakfast tables throughout rural America. It gave working men the calories and energy they needed to do physical labor all day long. It filled up children before they walked miles to school. It helped families survive when there was almost nothing else to eat. Today, fried cornmeal mush costs about 60 cents per serving if you make it yourself, compared to $4 to $5 for store-bought breakfast meats or frozen breakfast items. That's why it remained popular long after the Depression ended. It wasn't just survival food. It was genuinely good food that happened to be incredibly cheap. For the generation that lived through those years, fried cornmeal mush represents something more than just a recipe. It's the taste of winter mornings, the smell of hot cast iron, the memory of families that stayed together and survived because they knew how to make a little bit of nothing into something that kept everyone going. Enchiladas. Depression-era cooking wasn't limited to traditional American dishes. In the Southwest, particularly in New Mexico and Texas, families adapted Mexican recipes using the cheapest ingredients available, and that meant corn tortillas and beans. These Depression-era enchiladas bore little resemblance to restaurant versions today. They were much simpler, built around dried beans that cost 5 cents per pound and corn tortillas that were even cheaper. Grandma would soak and cook the beans just like for cornbread and pinto beans. While the beans simmered, she'd prepare a simple tomato sauce, often using canned tomatoes or fresh ones from the garden when available. Onions, garlic, and dried chili peppers went into the sauce for flavor. Some families added cumin or oregano if they had access to those spices. The corn tortillas, which families often made at home for masa harina, got dipped briefly in the tomato sauce to soften them, then filled with the cooked beans and maybe some sautéed vegetables if anything was available. The filled tortillas got rolled up, placed in a baking dish, topped with more sauce, and baked until everything was hot and bubbling. Cheese was optional and often omitted because it was expensive. Meat almost never appeared in Depression-era enchiladas unless someone was making them for a special occasion. The beauty of this dish was the same as succotash. Beans and corn together create complete protein, meaning families got proper nutrition without spending money on meat. A pan of bean enchiladas cost maybe 20 cents and fed 6 to 8 people, making it one of the most economical meals available. Today, homemade bean enchiladas still cost just a few dollars to prepare, while restaurant versions charge $12 to $15 for a plate. The Depression generation in the Southwest proved that diverse, flavorful food doesn't require money, just creativity and willingness to work with what's available. These 25 corn dishes represent more than just recipes. They're proof that during the darkest economic period in American history, families found ways to not just survive, but to create meals that brought comfort, provided nutrition, and kept people together around the table. A single bag of cornmeal became 25 different dishes, each one designed to stretch resources, minimize waste, and feed as many people as possible for as little money as possible. If this journey back to your grandmother's kitchen has taught you something or reminded you of meals from your own childhood, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so that you don't miss our next video. And if you want to learn even more Depression-era cooking wisdom, things like tenderizing meat naturally with vinegar, using pasta water to thicken sauces without flour, or making whipped cream from bananas and egg whites, then watch our next video, 25 Genius Grandma Cooking Tricks You'll Wish You Knew Sooner. You'll discover techniques that modern cooking has forgotten, but that still work better than anything you can buy in a store. Thank you for spending this time with us, remembering the recipes and the people who created them.